Yo, 1212 DJ D Lobes here. Yeah, that's right, kids. Mr. Lober here. Going to talk a little bit about the 100 Years' War. All right. 1337 to 1453. Doesn't exactly sound like 100 years, does it? Well, it's a little bit easier to call it the 100 Years' War than it is the 116 Years' War. Anyway, what we have here, kids, is a war between France and England, two countries that will frequently have conflict with one another during this course. And these are two countries that will continue, as I said, to fight not just each other, but for really dominance, a term we will henceforth refer to as hegemony. That's right. Dominance, hegemony, both looking to accomplish and create hegemony over the rest of their European neighbors. Two countries separated by the English Channel, a narrow body of water that in some areas is as close as about 50 miles. All right, so this war, we want to talk about the causes, some of the more significant events that take place during the war, and then, of course, the conclusion. Can't forget the importance of Joan of Arc in all of this, which she helps create a turning point. And then, of course, the effects. Some of the effects we're not going to really see until later chapters in this European history course. So what we want to look at initially is like a crisis of secession. That's when you have a monarch who does not have a secured successor. Typically, it's going to be firstborn son or secondborn, but there are instances when that doesn't take place, where they don't have sons, and so somebody else will claim the throne, and when that takes place, there can frequently be civil wars. All right, and so civil wars, just so we know, and we'll talk about this later too, is the absolute worst thing that can happen to a country. All right, so what we have is the Capetian dynasty that has ruled for several hundred years. If we look all the way back to the year 1152, we see a woman by the name of Eleanor of Aquitaine, which is a region in southwestern France, marry King Henry II of England. So, as it is, the King of England then is actually what we would refer to as a vassal in France. So the King of England is a landholder in France. As a vassal, he is supposed to claim, or pledge rather, allegiance to the French king. So that's a little weird. But yeah, what we want to talk about is the failure of the Capetian dynasty to create a male heir. So what we have is a crisis of secession. So as we look at this screen, we can see it. You have Philip IV, who has three sons, and each one of those sons rule in successive order, but none of them have a male heir. So what we see is that Philip does indeed have a daughter, and Isabel is her name, and she's married to the English king. And through some intrigue, Isabel and her lover, Mortimer, murder Edward II, and this allows Edward III to, or Edward II's son, to ascend to the throne, and he will be known as Edward III. But at his, ascension, he has not yet reached the age of majority, and that's a term you need to be familiar with. The age of majority is when a king is old enough to rule kind of under his own steam. Until that age has been reached, which usually is the age of 18, the king will have a series of advisors that will help him make decisions. Oftentimes, those advisors are going to be referred to as a regent, R-E-G-E-N-T. So his mother, Isabel, will be Edward's regent until he until he reaches the age of majority. And in this case, that's 1330. At any rate, what we have then is an English king, Edward III, as a legitimate claimant to the throne. But because of the long-standing conflict between the two countries, there are a number of high-ranking nobles who do not want to see that happen. And they are going to create a legal challenge that they will then claim that the King Philip IV's nephew would in fact be the correct. So his brother was the Count Charles, who had a son, Philip VI. So I know this is complicated, but bear with me, all right? So I'm just trying to, this is what the rewind button is for, so that you can go back and listen to this a couple times so that you can get it straight in your head. But anyway, these high-ranking nobles are going to raise a legal challenge, and instead they're going to claim that Philip, who will become Philip VI, should in fact be the rightful heir to the throne. So that would be the nephew of Philip IV. So they're going to raise this legal challenge in what is known as the Parliament of Paris. It's spelled with an E, kids, so it's not to be confused with the Parliament that is in London or the legislative body of England. This is a judicial body, so it sounds the same, but it's spelled differently and means something different as well. I think that's could be mistaken, but I think that's a homonym. At any rate, they were able to find a loophole that would basically say that it was illegal or unlawful for a female to be allowed to rule, or a female's offspring to rule France as the rightful king. So this is how we get to Philip VI. So that ends the Capetian dynasty, and it begins the Valois dynasty, which will be in power for several centuries. Okay? Let's see. What the king of France then does, Philip VI, is he attempts to rid any type of rightful claim that Edward of England would have. So he seizes the duchy of Aquitaine. He steals Edward III's territory, Aquitaine, inside of France. And this is obviously going to create some anger on the English side, and it certainly is one of the causes of the war. All right. One of the other things that takes place is up in northeastern France. There's a region known as Flanders, and it is a wool-producing region. Okay. Now, there is a symbiotic relationship between the French and the English here, because the English are providing the Flemish wool weavers, I guess, with the raw wool. Okay, so it's going to be English sheep that provide the Flemish wool weavers the wool. All right. So anyway, what happens is there's some unrest in there, and they're unhappy with their vassal, and the King of England, Edward III, encourages them to revolt, and this revolt is put down, okay, by Philip VI, and he arrests all of the English merchants that just happen to be inside of Flanders. All right, and so what Edward does is he retaliates by cutting off the wool to Flanders, and he encourages a lot of those weavers to come to England, which they do. All right, so it was kind of a tit for tat, and war will soon ensue. Okay, if we look at it on, I guess, on paper, it should be that France should have no problem to defeat England because they're a much larger country, wealthier, like I said, larger population. But because of the lack of consolidation, if you will, inside of France, the king is not going to wield the kind of power necessary to defeat and repel the English. And it's really due to the fact that he doesn't have the power to tax. France is going to be a mess. It's going to be a decentralized state until Louis XIV and then Napoleon, in fact. So what we're going to see are the provinces that were controlled by strong nobles retain a lot of power inside of France. So that term provincialism is used to describe the way in which France was decentralized. And that is the problem. Nobles too strong, unwilling to give the king the money. The power of the purse is what wins wars. And if they don't have the power to tax, then they're not going to have the power to raise an army. And so that's really the inherent weakness that France has at this time. Okay, so the legislative body that exists in France is called the Estates General, and this is, usually dominated by the nobles. And as I said, the nobles are unwilling to give the king the kind of taxation or the ability to collect taxes that he wants. They're always going to want something in return. So what we call this, kids, is quid pro quo. I believe that's a Latin term, this for that. So the only way in which the king is going to be able to get the taxation that he needs is to give the nobles something they want. And what do they want? Tax exemption, larger estates. They want to be bribed, and that's how things got done. And so it was very inefficient, whereas if you look at England at this time, their kings are a little bit more powerful and have, I guess, a more cooperative nobility. All right, so enough of that. The English also had an edge when it comes to weaponry, and if we see here, it's called the Welsh longbow, and this was a weapon that debuted early on for the English. I think it came online right at the beginning of the 14th century. At any rate, this bow had the power to pierce plate mail, and so the armor that the French knights wore would not be protection enough. Okay, and this is going to really change. This is going to be a big game changer, the introduction of the longbow, because most feudal lords had relied on knights. The knights were the preeminent weapon, and this is the way in which things have been done for hundreds of years in Europe. The fighting was done by knights. With the introduction of the longbowman, it's going to change things, because obviously it makes the knights obsolete, and it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money to train knights, years of training to learn how to fight on horseback and to joust and to fight with their swords and to become a master at riding a horse. The converse, but a longbowman, it could be a commoner, it could be a peasant. It doesn't require a lot of training to learn how to pull a bowstring, to aim, and so the English are going to not be quite so reliant on the knights. And sometimes knights can be fickle, all right? Fickle as in they change their minds frequently, okay? Sometimes they'll fight for you, sometimes they won't. So you can just hire some commoners, pay them very cheaply, and it doesn't take a whole lot of money to equip them. So it is a distinct advantage for a number of reasons, as I just kind of indicated. So when we look at the first part of fighting the 100 Years' War, one battle that is very significant is the Battle of Crécy, 1346. This is where the two armies meet, and this is a French town. The English Navy secures a victory early on in the fighting, and that means that they are always going to be able to get supplies across the English Channel to France, and so all the fighting is going to be done in France. So the French land or countryside is going to be frequently destroyed by armies that plunder, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But anyway, the Battle of Crécy is the first in a number of English stunning victories, and it's where the longbow proves that it is an effective weapon. The French knights arrive in battle, and they're eager to fight the English, and they don't wait for their crossbowmen who are traveling by foot, and so they instead rush into attack, and they and actually the English use another advantage, and that is height. They go to higher ground, and so the French knights have to travel uphill, and so it's very easy for the longbowmen to rain arrows down onto them, and they defeat them or shoot the horses out from under them, and then the French knights, or excuse me, the English knights are able to come down and kind of finish the job. So as a result of that and some other victories we see, and you can see here on this map, the territory of Aquitaine grows, and then way up there in northern France near Flanders is a city called Calais. That's going to become a permanent English stronghold until late in the war. So I mentioned this earlier. I think it's not a war that was fought continuously. There were going to be a lot of breaks, and so there are going to be some breaks in it. Another important point is the fact that the countryside was devastated. The population suffered greatly from the armies who lived off of the land, and that's called plundering. And there was no ability of either army to properly feed their troops, and so and this was customary, live off of the countryside. And discipline was not always very high, and so not only would they steal, but food or livestock, but they would they would do terrible things to the women. All right, and so we see a lot of crimes, atrocities committed against the civilian population, and this is not going to go unanswered. Eventually, the French are going to revolt, and this is going to be something that we talk about later after the 100 Years' War. Okay, the French, though, are able to rally and push back the English. So this is a back and forth struggle. So you don't really need to be that terribly concerned about that. But the last part of the fighting or the war, it looks as if the English are going to be successful and take the whole country. All right. So by this point in time, there is a new king in England, and his name is Henry V. Henry the V. And the battle that I want to kind of talk about is the Battle of Agincourt, and that takes place in 1415. Okay, so it is very similar to the Battle of Crécy in that the English longbowmen are they're the reason why the English are successful. it is interesting to note here, kids. I'm going to tell you a little something. It's not in the notes. I debated on whether or not I wanted to tell you this, but I figured this will help my street cred. This will help me be cool if I tell you this story. All right. So prior to this battle, the Battle of Agincourt, the French were feeling very confident, as they always are, and that is one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of the French, because of their arrogance. But they issue a threat to the English longbowmen. They tell the English longbowmen that they would, if they captured the English longbowmen, they would cut off their middle finger. And you might be asking, why would they cut off their middle finger? Well, because you need your index finger and your middle finger to properly pluck, is what it's called, the arrow. All right, to pull back the drawstring or the bowstring, and so that's their plucker finger. Well, that's not how the battle went. The French did not capture English soldiers or English longbowmen, and the French, in fact, won. So the victorious English decided to flip the middle finger, their plucker finger, to the defeated French, as a sign that that didn't happen. So it gives new meaning to the phrase "flipping the bird." At any rate, this battle contributes to the French almost losing their country. There were other defeats that the French had suffered from, and so what we see is a treaty that Henry V really gets a lot of good terms out of this. The king at the time, the French king at this time, is Charles VI. According to this Treaty of Troyes, his son, who is the Dauphin, that's a term given to the boy king, or the prince, or the heir to the throne, that's just a French term, who will become later Charles VII, is illegitimate, that he is not the rightful heir, okay? That Henry is going to be the successor of Charles VI, and he is, in fact, going to be the regent of much of the land south of the Loire River. All right, so France is pretty much cut in half here, and so when the current French king dies, Charles VI, that means that it's going to pass to English hands. All right, so not only does the French king Charles VI have to declare that his son is illegitimate, that he has to give his daughter to Henry for a marriage, and it's going to be their son that is going to be the next rightful heir and king of France. All right. So now you got Charles, the son, the Dauphin. He's not gonna accept this. I mean, basically, even before he's crowned, he's forced to abdicate or give up. Abdicate means give up his throne, and so he is going to attack. And this is the turning point of the war. This is called the Battle of Orleans that we're getting ready to talk about, okay? But before we do, we need to mention Joan of Arc and the role that she's going to play in all of this. Joan of Arc is a peasant girl, and she's going to go down in history as one of the most remarkable stories ever, certainly female. But, whether she's, female or male, it doesn't really matter. It's an amazing story, but she is somebody that comes from a very pious and devoted family. As a peasant and as a woman, a girl at this time frame, the fact that she was able to get an audience with the king and lead an army, I mean, it's absolutely amazing and unbelievable. But anyway, she at a young age began hearing voices, and before long it's revealed to her that these voices belong to saints. One's the Archangel Michael, and then St. Catherine and St. Margaret. And these voices compel her to do some things that she doesn't feel comfortable doing, but they won't leave her alone. And so after years of pestering her, she finally takes action. And what is it that they want her to do? They want her to expel the English and save France. And at this time, there isn't really a united France, as I've mentioned earlier. So she's really a patriot because, or a nationalist, if you will, because what she's talking about doing is saving a united France. Anyway, that's kind of a side point. Because there isn't a united France, but these saints are telling her that that's what she has to do. Anyway, in order for her to do that, she's got to go through many, many steps. First of which is that she's going to have to gain an audience with the king. And how she's able to secure an audience with the king is that she has to first convince a military commander that she is in fact legit, and that's no easy feat. She travels to a neighboring town and approaches the French commander of this city, and she tells him exactly what the saints told her to do, and he rebuffs her. And it's her persistence really that kind of helps her win the day. So she doesn't go away. In fact, she continues to pester this guy, and the saints tell her of a recent battle that has taken place, and the result of which is still in doubt, is still in question. Nobody knows. Word has not reached this French town, but the saints tell Joan that the French have lost. They've lost a crushing defeat. And so finally, when a messenger arrives a couple days later, all of a sudden now this French commander is starting to kind of think maybe there is something to what Joan is saying. So he sends her to the Dauphin to secure this audience with the boy king. And the boy Charles is, he's warned, or he's told about Joan and who she claims to be. And so he tries to trick her. When she finally gains an audience with him and his court, he disguises himself, and she is able to immediately identify who he was. And then there were some other things that she was able to do to convince him, one of which was he had a fear that he was not, in fact, legitimate, that his mother and father's relationship was in question, and there were rumors that he might not have been his father's son. And she puts that to rest, and nobody would have known that was a great fear of the boy King Charles. So he's convinced, but yet he has to convince some of the religious advisors, and they're called ecclesiastical people. They would be like bishops. And so she is put through intense questioning, and they can find nothing impure or wrong about her. So eventually she is given an army, and the city of Orleans is under attack, and this is where she is going to fight. Now, it's important to note that when she traveled as a boy, or as a male dress, put her hair under her clothing, and wore male's clothing. And this is going to be something that is important later on in this story, which we're quickly getting to. So she is given command of an army, and Charles offers her a sword, but she wants another sword. St. Catherine, who is one of the voices that she has heard, has told her that there is a sword buried at the church that honors her. It's called St. Catherine's Chapel. Inside St. Catherine's Chapel, behind the altar, there's believed to be a sword buried there. And so the king instructs it to be dug up, and presto, exactly where Joan described it to be, there's a sword found, and that is the sword that she is going to lead into battle. And as they arrive at Orleans, Joan sends a letter to the English telling them to get out, or that they will be driven out. And this is something that angers the English, and they attack. The French counterattack all the forts that are surrounding Orleans that are under the control of the English, and it's here that Joan is first injured because she quickly rushes into battle, and they lay siege to one of the forts, and she goes up a ladder, and she is shot in the breast with an arrow, but she quickly recovers. They defeat the English at Orleans, and they are able to extend those victories further out, regain more control, and then the city of Rheims, which is the historic city where kings are coronated, is taken by the French from the English, and they are able, and Joan is able to sit by while Charles is crowned the King of France. Okay? Things quickly kind of unravel here for Joan. There is a battle at a nearby city. I don't know, it's not Compiègne is the name of the battle. It is being attacked, and Joan is there helping to defend the city. It is being attacked by a group known as the Burgundians, who are kind of in central eastern France, a place called Burgundy, and they are allied with the English. They attack this town, and it's being laid siege to. And I guess one night, Joan and about 500 other soldiers sneak out and launch a surprise attack. They face superior numbers, stiffer resistance than they thought, and then they flee. They retreat. They come back to the city that has a drawbridge, because most cities were walled. The drawbridge is raised before Joan and a few other soldiers get inside, and that is how she is captured. It would have been very easy for Charles VII to secure her release. He could have, released an English prisoner of high-ranking status, but instead he chooses not to. And Joan is then sold to the English. She is quickly put on trial by the English in French territory, and there's an Inquisition-style trial, and she, over about 10 weeks, is beaten down, not physically but mentally. And although she puts up very stiff resistance, they quickly wear her down. They're trying to discredit her, and they're trying to destroy the French morale. Because the tide, the momentum has changed, and it's on. The French have the momentum, and so they're trying to destroy that by discrediting Joan. One of the things that they refuse to allow Joan to do is receive any privileges of going to church and receiving the sacraments. And for Catholics, the Eucharist is something that is a big deal, and so they refuse to allow Joan to receive the Eucharist, and that is something that is believed that she drew strength from. And so as time goes on, and she's not able to receive that sacrament, it weakens her. And then what we see is she's eventually forced to recant. Okay? And it was under threat of torture. And then where the prison where they kept her, actually, and this is important, she was kept in a male prison in male clothing. So they threatened her with, that they were going to find her guilty and that she would be burned at the stake. They said that they would not burn her at the stake if she recanted, took back what she said. That's what recant means. Take back what she said about hearing voices from saints. So it's then that she does, and so she signs a, I don't know, affidavit of some sort, and indicates that she, did not in fact hear these voices. They send her back to prison, and the English decide that they're going to try her on another charge, and that is for wearing men's clothing, and that somehow that's tied to heresy. Not really sure, but that is ultimately what costs her life, is that she wore men's clothing. And so just before her execution, she was allowed to receive, I guess that was like her last wish, that she would be able to go to Mass, go to confession, which is another Catholic sacrament, and then receive the Eucharist. So evidently she draws some strength from this, renewed strength. And as she is put up on the pyre, the wood, and the stake has been erected where she's tied to, right before they ignite the fire, she announces, or takes back her recant. She says she in fact does hear voices, or that she did hear these saints, and the saints, spoke from God, and that she is true, and that she is essentially a prophet of God. And so the English quickly burn her at the stake. It takes 500 years before the Roman Catholic Church realizes it's a mistake, and she is quickly declared a saint. And the effect of her intervention in all of this is that the morale continues to be high, and the English are defeated. One of the other things that is introduced, a new weapon, the French use it a little bit more effectively than the English do, and that is the cannon. And so this proves to be a very good siege weapon, and it can penetrate the walls of castles. And so no longer are castles really an effective protection. All right, so now we have weapons that can defeat that. And so the new weaponry is going to change warfare in a big way. But what we see is that the English are finally kicked all the way out of France. We see a resurgence in love of country, I guess. You can call it nationalism in France. And the country quickly recovers, and that's pretty much it, which was a lot. But I'm going to sign off for now. Until next time, kids. Au revoir.